Welcome back to the Slice of Empathy podcast. Welcome to today's episode. This is really just going to be a pretty personal one. I'm just testing the waters a little bit, doing a little marriage podcast series. And today we're going to be talking with my husband a little bit about his story, about his upbringing, and not just the facts of what happened, but how it's really shaped him over the years, especially in ways he didn't recognize as trauma until much later on in his life. We're going to be starting off by talking with how he lost his dad at 16, but also about some years before that, growing up in a divorced home, having a mom who wasn't emotionally available, and what that does to a young boy who's trying to make sense of the world. All right. So welcome back to the podcast. How does it feel to be on here again as a guest a year later? I think the last episode that we recorded together was the couples game that we did on our anniversary last year. So it is fitting that it's been actually exactly 1 year. Today is going to be a more serious conversation. How do you feel about being back on here? You nervous?
A little nervous. That's mostly because I feel awkward listening to myself on the podcast.
Well, it'll be me going back and editing it. And then, of course, other people will be listening. So you yourself would have to listen back. But I know the feeling. Let's go back to before you really realized grief, I guess, that you had experienced in your childhood, because you didn't really recognize it as, I guess, grief until much later. Your parents divorced when you were about 1 year old, right?
Yeah, they weren't together very long. I'm not sure how old they were when they got together, but my mom was actually pregnant with me when they got married, because I didn't actually realize that until I was older, and I was looking at pictures and I was like, oh, mom was like 3 months pregnant with me. And then my parents were actually planning on getting married, but then, for obvious reasons, they had to push it up. They weren't together for very long. I guess, according to my grandmother, I guess my mom just wasn't very happy, and they divorced when I was 1. So I have absolutely no memories of my parents together because I was way too young to remember.
Yeah, and she was 20 and your dad was 30, right?
Yep. Mom was very young. She was only 20, barely out of high school. They actually met kind of like how we met because they were working together. I think my mom was in an administrative position, like a secretary or something. Dad was insurance adjuster. So you'd go out and you'd look at cars and stuff when they get in accidents. And they divorced when I had no memories. Dad raised me pretty much my whole life because he was being 10 years older. He was much more established and probably would have been a better, more stable household being raised by my dad.
Yeah, and I want to touch on the age difference a little bit because it's interesting. I know that was definitely during a different time because that was 41 years ago. But it's interesting because we are 6 years apart and your parents were 10 years apart. And I know when we got together, it's really interesting because although your mom was 20, we don't know how, it sounds like maybe they knew each other for maybe a couple of years before they actually got married. So I think by today's standards, a lot of folks, I feel are really resistant, even if you're of legal age. People be like, oh my gosh. The other day I was watching this couple where the girl was 21, or the woman was 21 and he was 27. And people are like, oh my gosh, that's too big of an age difference. He's a groomer, da-da-da. We hear a lot. I mean, I feel like that's just thrown out there. And I think in some situations it makes sense. But I guess for us, it didn't seem like a big deal, and it probably wasn't a big deal to your parents, although, and I think we'll get into it a little bit more, it kind of makes sense why your dad raised you for a couple of reasons from what we've talked about previously ad nauseum, that your mom was young, 1, and then 2, had her own generational trauma. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we get into the podcast a little bit more, because it'll make sense why she kind of was the way kind of mother that she was to you. But you were about 1 year old, lived with your dad full time. You saw your mom every other weekend. Would you describe it as, did you just kind of feel like a guest in her life, not really like her son?
Yeah, I would say that was accurate. Mom and I didn't really spend any quality time together at all. It was very much back in the day when Blockbuster was around, we'd rent like 2 movies, and then Mama would let me watch whatever. And she was super lenient about like what I was allowed to watch compared to Dad. There's some stuff she wouldn't let me watch.
Really?
Well, there's like certain R-rated movies she wouldn't let me watch. She was pretty lenient. I mean, which is kind of cool in a sense, but at the same time, we didn't really spend any quality time together. It's like, here's a couple movies to watch, some snacks. Mom didn't cook, unlike you, did not like to cook at all. So
Yeah.
it was always like a frozen dinner or something. But when you're a kid and you get to watch, your mom's the one who, lets you watch stuff that Dad wouldn't let you watch, then you don't really think about it. Because at the time I was too young, and when I reflect on it now as 41-year-old guy, not really that great, I guess. It's kind of hard to say just because we didn't really spend any time together, like any sort of like mother-son bonding time, which is too bad, but
Yeah.
there's reasons for that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's funny because like there is some similarities that we have, which we'll get into as well. But it's interesting that experience was kind of the opposite for me because, for those of you who've listened to like my story at the very beginning of this podcast series, both my parents were emotionally unavailable. However, my mom was a lot stricter in terms of like the things I could watch. Had I grown up with her, I probably wouldn't have found the X-Files because she probably wouldn't let me watch it, but my dad did. Mentioned Blockbuster. We also went to this, is actually where that bagel shop is now. There used to be a movie place next door to it.
I think I remember
You do
that.
remember that?
I vaguely
Yeah.
remember that back in the day.
Yeah.
Valerie and I are coming up on our 17th wedding anniversary this month. We're just like
Next week.
17 years. Who'd have thought?
Yeah. And it's funny because, we went to that movie store a lot when it wasn't Blockbuster. It was that movie store. And I think there was actually time, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but I rented some hentai movie and my dad didn't, I think, realize it. And no questions were asked. And I get home and I watch it. And so for those of you who are familiar, hentai is basically Japanese, like animated porn.
One of my buddies, Josh, was at our wedding. I remember him telling me that he grabbed one, and I don't know if it was intentional or unintentional, but his dad didn't pay attention, and then he rented it, and his mom found out later, and she got pissed off, which was pretty funny.
That sounds like something my mom would do too, actually. It's pretty funny how, like, especially when we first got together, like, so many similarities, but it's like kind of like reversed for me. Like, my dad was the one that was more lackadaisical. My mom wasn't. But kind of coming back, going between homes up until you're about 16, what was the difference like and how you were treated in each?
Mom was always emotionally unavailable, and I didn't really find out why until my Uncle Pete released his book, No Tears for Dad, I think is the correct title.
Yeah.
And it really explained why Mom was the way Mom is. Of course, the book is about my uncle, but, being that my mom is younger sibling, she's obviously going to be a supporting character. To be blunt, my grandfather was kind of a dick and treated my aunts and uncles very, very poorly. So he's rather abusive. So as soon as they turned 18, almost everybody moved out immediately. My mom being the youngest, she never got hit physically, but verbally.
Emotional abuse.
Verbal emotional abuse. So that kind of explained why she was just like so emotionally unavailable, especially because, when you're so young and then like you're barely out of high school and bam, pregnant.
Yeah. So she didn't really have a chance to really process like her own trauma. And then all of a sudden you're like thrown into parenthood. You're young, generational trauma, and a young parent on top of that. I mean, it makes sense. Not that it was obviously right, but it makes sense like how that happened. And I can kind of relate too, because my mom had her own generational trauma as well. My grandfather, who was also very abusive. And I think that's another thing that we could relate on to, thinking about it. So there was a lot of trauma in the household. And not only can you not be a good mom, you probably can't be a good partner because you haven't really dealt with all of these things, basically going from your abusive child at home into marriage and becoming a mom. But it's also a lot for a kid, who might unaware of all of that, all those dynamics. You don't have the capacity to understand why your parent is unavailable. And it's interesting because like when we got together, even for some years afterwards, you tell me like how normal your childhood was. And for me, it's always been so important for kids to have like two emotionally available and present parents is because you can't replace the other one as much as the one parent can try and take on all of it. It's still going to kind of leave like that mark. Like a kid would probably be thinking, why doesn't my mom love me, or whatever. And it's not necessarily that black and white. It's not necessarily that the parent doesn't love you, but they don't have the emotional capacity to be attentive in the way that a kid perceives love. So the absence of that maternal connection, I think you realized as the years went by, affected you more than you realized at the time, right?
Yeah, I would say that's correct. I guess I didn't really think about it at the time because when I was younger, I mean, even when I moved in after dad passed away, I don't really spend a whole lot of quality time together. But, as a teenager, when you just like, you kind of want to screw around and play video games and you don't really care.
That's all teenagers.
That's pretty much all
Yeah.
teenagers. So I don't really think about that. But like my parents always went out to eat. And they really loved Chili's, and like the staff knew them by name because they went all the time. But they never took me. Like, what the hell, man?
But let's go back a little bit then, because then your mom married your stepdad when you were 10. So about 10 years later, she got married again to your stepdad.
Yep. They were together for a long time before they got married.
What was that dynamic like when Rich was in the picture?
Oh, he never interacted with me. He was, just be blunt, he was a dick. And he never made any sort of effort to interact with me. You would think when you're together with someone and they have a kid and technically been a part of this kid's life forever, like most of their life. Yeah, he never interacted with me. And then I know for a fact that dad and my stepdad, because my parents got married when I was 10 years old, they did not like each other at all. And then the funny thing is, years later, my aunt, she had just said in a very roundabout way a couple years back when we were visiting that he's kind of a dick without saying it. Just saying it without saying it. Right? It's like, okay, well, this is very validating because like he treated me poorly. I guess my Uncle Pete would send cards with like a check or something, and they would never get cash because I never saw that. I was like, you sent money? I never saw that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting and it's reassuring as well, even for me, because I'll talk a little bit later about my experience with him. But yeah, like your mom's brothers came out and admitted as such, like their feelings about him, and your aunts on your dad's side, their opinions in like a very tactful way.
They're very nice about it.
Very nice, politically correct way.
Yeah, very politically correct way of saying that. Like he's not a particularly nice person. One of my buddies who's a good friend, I'm still friends with him, but he's like, stepdad was always nice to me. It's like, I get it because, he never saw that side. So, and my stepdad also helped him get a job at like a dealership he worked at. So,
and I mean, that's probably a hard position to be in. Like on one hand, it's just like, you're my friend, you should have my back, not my parents' back, right? But also at the same time, it's like, that's a hard position to be in if the person is nice to you and you don't see the other side. And I want to talk a little bit about Jekyll and Hyde parents, because I actually saw this story come across my Instagram and my mom and I were actually talking about it. So if you have a Jekyll and Hyde parent, basically, and many of the listeners probably can relate to this, it's basically where your parent, in a way, can show two different sides. So let's say you grew up in a very abusive home, say my mom did, and to her dad wasn't a good person, but to the public, he had this persona that was very likable, that no one would have any earthly idea that he was abusive or treating his daughter this way. And I think in a way, your mom wasn't physically abusive towards you. We can argue maybe emotionally. I'd say more emotionally negligent would be more the proper term.
I would say so.
But it's interesting because when you and I got together, like the roles for dating my daughter, like from the dad, but it was like in the reverse, the mom and son. So it was really interesting because she's like, okay, like, I want to know what your intentions are with my son. And it was a little bit awkward.
I
I mean,
didn't.
it
I
was,
did. I found it a little amusing at the time, but
yeah,
yeah, it's it
it
was.
was funny. And then like your stepdad was kind of like, why are we doing this? It's really interesting because as the years kind of go on and we're together, we're dating at that time. And then so I'm gonna see a little bit more of your mom's true colors than let's say maybe like a typical person when on the outside, like maybe a friend or something like that, because you're like more closely tied to one another. And so I thought it was really interesting because in like you did go through a period of time where you didn't talk to your mom, but then when we were getting married, she did kind of put on a show in a way to really be like, I'm the mother of the groom.
Yeah,
Like it just kind of again comes back to like the persona that she was displaying was one that indicated that you guys were close, but you were.
yeah,
And that's what I find rather
very true.
interesting. But I want to go back a little bit before we kind of like go forward. So then at 16, your dad passes away. This is the one constant in your life. Can you tell our listeners what you remember about that time? What was that like for you?
It's been a long time. Well, since I'm 41, and it's been longer than I was alive at the time when Dad passed away, if that makes sense. It happened just very, very suddenly. Dad got really sick. His balance was like he would fall over easily. I remember he was at the house that he and his fiance bought, and actually she still lives at. It's fairly big property. Like at the time, I think when I was bought, it was like 800,000, but it's worth a huge chunk of money now. But it's like, I don't know if it was like half an acre or something. It was a pretty big plot of land. And they had a koi pond in back. And I remember Dad falling over and just his equilibrium being really bad. And then just finding out a few weeks later that he had a brain cancer. He had a glioblastoma, which is, I think, the worst kind of brain cancer you can get. It's extremely aggressive. And then it's like not even a month later, my dad passed away, and I was a freshman in high school. It was not a very good time. I'd taken Spanish in eighth grade, and I decided, I'll take Spanish too. That was a bad idea because, like, I was literally like this little freshman because I I didn't go through my growth spurt, like puberty, through till I was like 16. So
Wow.
I was this little kid surrounded by juniors and seniors, and there's this one guy who just picked on me the whole time, and he was a total dick. And then combine that with losing your parent, it was not a very good year. And being suddenly thrust into moving in very suddenly with your parents it was it's a shock to the system because, my parents weren't expecting it. So first few nights I had to sleep on the couch in the living room before they bought my bed. And I took the second bedroom because had bought a condo, which now is worth a lot of money. Back then it was 180,000 or 200. It wasn't too much, but now because where it is a lot. It's probably worth twice of what our condo is, and it was a big shock to the system because you move from one parent who very loving parent who's just like been just a very mainstay rock in your life to your emotionally unavailable mother and your dick for a stepdad. Uh, and I laugh about that, but yeah, he was something else. Like probably that year, it could have been like 6 months after dad had passed away, and I'm living with them. And he's just like, "Oh well, my dad passed away when I was young too, and you should just get over it." And then it's just that sort of, just to be blunt, toxic masculinity bullshit that can just be shot into the sun. Yeah, it was hard to get used to.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, total shock. I'm sure you felt like your foundation was ripped out. Thrust into living full time with your mom, who's emotionally unavailable, someone that you've barely had a chance to bond with. And then to live obviously with your stepdad, too, who made it worse, who was very cold and critical. Did anyone ask how you were doing? Did you feel like there was anyone that you could lean on at all during this time?
No, not at all. Mom didn't even think to get me a therapist at that time, or to get therapy, I guess I should say. Hell, she didn't even get herself therapy until like I was in high school. I don't know, maybe a year or two later. She was crying because just thinking about it, it's crap that she put up with when she was growing up. And I was just kind of like, why are you crying, mom? She's, oh, I just, she'd say some offhand comment about whatever, her childhood or whatever. And, I as a grown ass man now, I was just like thinking, why the hell didn't you give me therapy? My
Yeah.
parent passed away.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you definitely should have been in therapy, especially at like during a time where like you're a teenager and you're going through like dealing with like hormone changes and all of that. And yeah, honestly, I don't know where I would be today without therapy. And for those of you who have been here since the beginning, you know my story about being taken away from the home that I live with my mom, going into they called it the receiving home.
Oh,
So
they're seeing mom. That's
basically,
right.
like it's when they take kids away from their parents, and this is where they stay basically until eventually you might be found a foster home or basically while your parents are in court. And I don't remember, but my mom said like I had cried the first night because I mean, understandably didn't know what the fuck was going on. And then there was 3 months of that. And then, well, long story short, I eventually went to live with my dad. But yeah, I had, I think, therapy. I think before that, after I came to live with my dad, and then I dealt with my own trauma during those next 10 years as well. So I don't know where I'd be without therapy. And I know that when I met you, this was 6 years after your dad had passed away, that you were still pretty raw about it. And I think that's because like he didn't have any therapy to really process it.
It would have helped.
Yeah. And we can only set our emotions and compartmentalize for so long, but eventually the emotions will come out. And if they don't, they'll manifest physically is something that I found out with IBS and all these other things. It will manifest physically and it will take a toll on your health. So we need to process our emotions and deal with these difficult things that we're given in life. But I think about it a lot because when we met, this is 6 years later, and I wasn't at a place to really be supportive because I was still coming out from like my own trauma. It's really similar that your mom and I actually have a very similar story. And so, like, I know they say that like you often will seek like a partner that's
Like your parent.
like your parent. And I guess it's a subconscious effort to, if you had a difficult relationship, it's a subconscious effort to try and reconcile that. And it makes sense. So in a way, like, especially as we talk a little bit about this later, but when your mom passed away of cancer, I think in a way we bonded a little bit over that because that part of our stories were kind of similar. But back to you, I mean, you just kind of felt like you had to kind of suppress the emotions. Is that right?
Kind
Just
of
kind
felt
of,
like that. I guess it's been so long. Honestly, don't even remember. But yeah, I mean, I was depressed about it for a long time. I don't think I really even got over it till after we were together for a little bit because we were friends and then we started dating.
so was there something that maybe happened that helped you kind of move on? Because like, since it sounded like you didn't really process it until after those 6 years at some point, was there like something that you felt like maybe healed that at some point since you didn't really do
Uh,
therapy until more recently?
I can't really think of anything as offhand, but as they say, time heals. Time heals old wounds, and it's very true. Time does eventually you heal from these wounds that you have, whether they're physically or emotionally, so to speak. And just that took time. And eventually, I guess I didn't really think about it as much. Eventually stopped bothering me less and less.
Yeah. So now I kind of want to talk about like when we got together, there were parts of you that were really strong, but also I remember when we met, just like the casual conversation, you ask about the person's parents, there's any siblings they might have. And I think I vaguely remember, I mean, for those of you who don't already know, we met at work. And I remember going into the lunchroom and I think asking something, I don't know if it was about your parents or something, but then you told me your dad passed away. And I'm like, oh, and I was still I mean, I was 16. I was still really, really young. And I'll be honest, like for me, dealing with trauma manifests a little bit different because like in a way, learned to guard my emotions very well. And I also had a really hard time, and sometimes still to this day, trying to comfort folks. I remember like I would know friends like in school and stuff going through some really heavy stuff and crying in front of me. And I'm just like just frozen, like, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to help you. And it's just like I feel like their pain, but then like I just get stuck because I'm at a loss as to what to do or say. Like I'm always afraid of doing or saying the wrong thing. And so like I don't even know what my response was, but like other than, oh wow, I'm really sorry to hear that, the typical stuff. But do you think that your childhood, and I know you were so young when your parents divorced that you don't remember it. I don't really remember my parents being divorced either. I think I was 4 or 5. Do you think that these things like followed you into adulthood?
Ah, gosh, it's hard to say. I had pretty stable upbringing as a kid. So it just, of course, being 16 and that, you're still growing up and still maturing and whatever. I would probably say so. It's my grandmother said, I think I'd asked her before she had passed away. She passed away at 102, which is pretty amazing. But I asked her about my mom and I mentioned and when I was a kid that, I wish mom would be more emotionally available for
Yeah.
me and that, she wasn't.
Yeah, I think actually your aunt had had a conversation with me and was talking to me about that. How you, as a kid, which makes sense, wanted her attention and she just couldn't give it to you. She didn't have the capacity to. And I'm really glad that your aunt like trusted me to have that conversation because it's just like there's something that, again, that's why I have this podcast. I'm really passionate about these subjects because like a lot of these things I can relate to on a personal level as well from my own childhood and parents not being emotionally there for me. In my case, it was both parents. But the most prevalent thing for me was that you would just tell me, oh, yeah, everything was normal. And I think I didn't even really realize the depth of what you really experienced until much later either. Your mom later gets diagnosed with brain cancer. What was your reaction to that? Like, how did you
It was
feel
like
about that?
a punch to the gut
Yeah.
because having both parents get brain cancer is just, well, to be blunt, it's fucked up. Brain cancer is not common. It kills something like, I don't know, I think last time I read it was like 1,500 to 1,800 people a year. And for both my parents to get it, here's what's weird is my parents were 10 years apart in age. They got it around the same age.
Yeah.
Dad was 46 when he passed away. Mom was 46 when she got it. It was a complete shock when I found it. Valerie and I were not married for very long. I think I was like in our first year of being married, 4 broke college students. I was completely shocked. Rushed over to the hospital, go see my mom because I was shocked and I was worried, of course, 'cause I'm her only son, her only child. And she's, oh, you didn't have to come and see me. And I was like, well, of course I did. I'm your
Right.
son.
Yeah.
Like, of course I'm going to come. She had told me she had like a stroke or something, and she couldn't.
Oh, she had seizures.
Seizures.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it. Not a stroke. It was seizures, and she couldn't feel like the left side of her body or something. It was either left side or right side. I don't remember. It was a long time ago, but that was a shock. And she didn't get glioblastoma. She had an astrocytoma, so she had a different form of brain cancer,
It was
slower moving, and not nearly as aggressive. But she went through chemo and all that stuff. And then like it went away for like 6 months and then it came back stage 4. And then at that time, when it's stage 4, you're pretty much screwed. It's just, you have to get all your affairs in order is basically when you're told that. It's just like, you have to get all your ducks in a row, so to speak. And yeah, that was shocking. And she passed away when she was 49. I wasn't even 30. I was only 29 because mom was 20 and I was born. And I wasn't even 30 when I had lost both my parents. So it was shocking and super depressing. I did cry when my uncle told me that she had passed away. And we lived nearby. We were 15 minutes away or something like that. We were pretty close. So I cried quite a bit. And then I saw not the coroner, but the person who
Oh,
comes put the body in the hearse,
yeah.
which was a minivan. I remember that. I don't remember what kind of minivan, but it was not like the usual hearse car, but it was a minivan. I remember that very vividly. Yeah, that you know sucks.
Yeah, I've mentioned it well through my own experience that what that was like, both of this being in college. It was actually during this time where you and your mom went to therapy together. Can you share a little bit about that?
Mom and I had always had a tenuous relationship, and to be honest, I blame a huge part of this on my stepdad, who's
Mm.
a dick. And I think the funny thing is that she went from an abusive father to marrying who's someone just like him, who's
Yeah.
abusive. When she was on chemo and she was, a little looping, kind of off, she made this offhand remark. And she's like, "Oh, I married an asshole just like my father."
We
Valerie and
had to
I,
bite our tongues.
we had to bite our tongues from laughing.
And your uncle was there,
And yes, my stepdad was pissed.
and
He
you
had to
could
very
see the
pissed
look.
off.
You could see the look in his face. Nobody said anything, but we just kind of like trying to hard to from laughing because it's like the truth. That was also very validating. Like as the years go by, and kind of going back to like when we were first together, your stepdad also was very dismissive of me. And I remember, again, at this point in time, I was going through my own stuff and took it very personally. And now I'm like, okay, that's just who he is. It's not anything that I did personally, but for the longest time when I was younger, I'm like, God, what did I do to this man? And I remember there was a day where I think we were outside and I think you had made some food and he just got mad at you in front of me, but it was talking about me as if I wasn't there.
I vaguely remember that. He just like, yeah, he would get pissed off. Just as a note, Valerie was 16 when we met. I was 22. I had never dated. I had never had a girlfriend before. I was super introverted, very quiet person. I'm still, of course, very introverted, just part of my personality. And I guess Rich wasn't happy about that. He was like, if that was my daughter, I would beat your ass or something like that. And it's just like, well, she's not your daughter and that's not your concern. It's not like we were being intimate or anything.
Yeah.
He was just not happy about it. And he would, like Valerie said, he got mad at me one time. I honestly don't remember, but he was talking about Valerie while she was like standing there and you just kind of awkwardly listen and you're like, hello, I'm standing right here. Can you do this conversation when I'm not physically present?
Right. This is someone who's known you since you were 10. For one, should know you being for you. And even if he was talking like abstractedly, like if he was my dad, he never even made an effort to talk to me or get to know me. But it makes sense. He didn't even do those things for you.
No,
Never made an effort. So can you tell us a little bit like what was your relationship like with them while you were living with your parents?
I think we had talked about this a little bit ago, but
Yeah.
treating me like a friend or an acquaintance. I'm your
Acquaintance, yeah.
fucking stepson. Like, come on, bro. Really? He- I can remember vividly before my parents gave me a bus pass so I can get around on my own, which was nice because it gave me more independence. I think dad would, if he was alive, he would have been more stricter about it.
About what?
Getting around. Although I did ride my bike to and from middle school,
Yeah.
but Rich and I didn't even interact. We just sat there awkwardly from my parents' condo because they had to do a district transfer because my parents lived in another city from where I went to high school. So they had to transfer districts so I had to take a bus, which thankfully was just a straight shot. It was just one bus. And then I had to walk like half a mile down the road to school. But like the first little bit of high school when I moved in with them, and he gave me a ride to school, it was awkward because he didn't say anything. It's not, no, like, like a good step parent or parent would be, oh, have a nice day. I hope you learned something interesting. That sort of thing, like a normal parent would
Yeah.
do. he didn't say shit. He didn't say anything. It was very awkward. And we just always kind of had this awkward tolerating each other relationship. I will say on one occasion, I do remember he actually did defend me, surprisingly enough. I don't know. I think it was at one of my first jobs when I was a teenager. I was like 16. I worked at this Mrs. Fields Cookies or something like that. And this was before I started working at Safeway. It was the Safeway before I met Valerie. But some girl I worked with was counting cash, and I think she must have slipped some of it in her pocket.
Oh, yeah.
And then, like, I guess I must have gotten fired along with this other girl. And then I think Rich was really pissed off, and he was like yelling at them on the phone. And then they hung up, and he called them back to yell at them again, which is pretty funny. But
That's something my dad would do. Actually.
yeah, that was actually one of the only times I could see he was actually defensive about me and being nice. Because most of the time, he was a dick.
It's really confusing. Like, honestly, in a way. Do you mind sharing with their listeners when your stepdad?
Oh, he's slapped me upside the head like really hard. And I don't even remember what the hell it was for. I didn't get bad grades. I was a pretty average student. I think when I graduated from my high school, it's like a 2.5 GPA. I very average. Sometimes like my mom would get mad at me because I would suck off and play video games, and then I would forget about homework, and then like, oh shit, I had some stuff due today, and I totally forgot. Yeah, and I wouldn't even remember. But like Rich, one time, I don't know what the hell his problem was, but he got really mad, and he slapped me upside the head, just like the open hand. He would joke about, you smack your kid for being stupid or something. Like that's what he did. He slapped me upside the head. I wasn't out fucking doing drugs or doing any delinquent behavior. I stayed at home. I played video games. I hung out with my buddies. That was it. I was not a bad kid.
It's hard for me to imagine.
I don't know what his problem was.
Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine you doing anything that would warrant a reaction like that. Did your mom say or do anything?
No, she was just
kind of, she knew he did it, but just allowed him to.
Yeah, she was probably right. She was probably right there in the same room. I mean, it was her condo, which he still lives in, is like 900 square feet. It's a split level. So it's not quite two levels, like an upper level and lower level, like our condo is, but it was just what they call a split level. And I would later learn from from my uncle's book that basically when my grandmother, she just kind of existed. When my grandfather would like beat and hit my ma or my aunts and uncles, she didn't do anything. Mom mirrored the same behavior, just
a repetition of generational trauma.
Exactly, the generational trauma. Like she just let my stepdad hit me upside the head, like any sort of normal mother would have beat their ass if, like, don't you hit my son? Yeah. That's not okay. But no, she didn't do anything.
Right, and I had my own issues with both my parents, but it's funny it's like one thing that my mom's like never allowed, like with my stepdad, was to discipline us, and if he ever tried to, she got really pissed off. I think there was one time, I don't even remember what it was about. I don't know if he said something. I don't think he hit me, but she just got really pissed off when she heard about it. I think she was at work at the time, just really, really pissed off. And so she's always made it clear that like disciplining us is her responsibility. And I think my dad's even done the same with his partners too. So I will credit them for that. They never allowed anyone that they were with to really like interfere with their parenting. So I want to go back a little bit because I know before we got married, you had stopped speaking to your mom for a little bit when you reached out to her a few months later to tell her that we were getting married. And then not too long before she passed away, we encountered something similar. But can you recall why you stopped speaking?
I don't remember exactly, but I know Valerie and I were dating at the time, and then I had run out half an hour to get Valerie something to eat.
That's right, yes.
And their dog, Charlie. So, yeah, because just, I don't know, she kind of annoyed me at the time. But like, oh, your brother, and she's like, to me, it's like it's fucking dog. It's not my brother. I already have a brother.
Well,
And
I mean, I know this is going to be a controversial take, but this is why generally I'm not crazy about human names for pets. I do have one cat named Diana, but is after a character in Sailor Moon, the anime. But I'm not a fan of people naming their dogs. Like Charlie is a common one. And then not too long after he passed away, they get
yeah,
dogs named
too.
Louie and Lizzie.
Yeah, Louie and Lizzie.
Louie can sort of see Lizzie, and then they would be like Louis and Elizabeth when they're mad. Like it's just weird, but anyway.
Yeah. So anyway, Charlie was getting up there in age, and he was blind, and he would. I guess it's common in Cocker Spaniels because he was blind and he lost his eyesight, so he'd kind of bump into things, and he just had surgery, so he had stitches on his like stomach or something like that, and he was an old dog. He was like,
he's got to be at least 12 or 13 at this point.
Yeah, 12. Yeah, 12 or 13. I don't remember the age, but Valerie probably remembered it, so it could have been around that time. And he's an old dog. He just like slept most of the time, whatever. So I figured, what the hell? I'd go out and get some Valerie on her lunch and then go back home. And like my parents got really pissed, like super pissed off. The dog's stitches could have ruptured and he could have died. And it was very just like over the top reaction.
Yeah, your mom actually did flip out this time. And I do remember that she's like, "What, are you mentally ill or something like that?"
Are you fucking stupid or something?
Something like that.
Yeah, I think it was something like that. She was like, "Are you fucking stupid or something?" She got really pissed off and then basically made me pack my stuff. And then
I think did she pack it for you? I think she packed it for you.
I think she did.
That's something my dad.
Yeah, and I was quite angry over your stupid fucking dog, and I was really mad. So I had to call my grandparents, dad's parents, so on my paternal side. So I went and lived with them for 6 months. I love my grandparents. They were great. They were just like a secondary sort of parent because dad raised me by himself. So they were like these secondary sort of parents because they helped raise me. Always be thankful for them. And thankfully they lived a long life. Grandpa lived to 96. Grandma lived to 102, which is crazy. And I lived with them for 6 months. It was, for its own reasons, it was kind of hard because they lived in an old home, and when it was winter, and the roll up windows and like the 50s houses, I was really cold. I had to wear a bunch of layers. But anyway, I was really mad. I was super pissed off and resentful about being kicked out over your stupid fucking dog. And it made me really angry for like quite a while. I somewhat got over it later, but it's still like one of those things in the back of my mind. I was really angry with my mother for.
Yeah, I feel like it's just one of those situations where the punishment just doesn't fit the crime. And what you're describing is something that like my dad would do. He's never done it with me, but he's threatened to do it with my brother, who was also around your age at the time. And I remember that. And I remember like, sometimes even think about it now, like I feel like, or I felt like for such a long time that was my fault because you came out to see me. But also you were only gone for 30 minutes to an hour. You didn't abandon him for like a day or something. He didn't just disappear. And they're younger dogs. I think it would make more sense if the dogs were fairly active. But all he did was really just lay around and sleep all day. But yeah, I just don't feel like the punishment really quite fit. There wasn't really any like hazards to really worry about, and we got it for such a short amount of time.
Yeah, and mom called me later. Like, well, Charlie passed away like 6 months, and just like
I should laugh about that.
Yeah, she laughed.
Sorry,
oh my god,
your impression is funny.
Oh, Charlie passed away. I'm just saying, good. Fuck that dog.
Yeah, I can't blame you there. Because she chose the dog over you, or seemingly did.
Yeah, I was
over
super pissed about that, and I was resentful for a very, very long time. So we stopped speaking for
a good couple months. Right?
A good couple months, at least. I don't know, 3 or 4. I don't think it was quite 6 months, but it was a good little bit, and I was just quite angry and resentful, and I held resentment for that for quite a while.
Do you feel like you still have resentment over that? Even though she's been She passed away in 2013 and now it's 2025, but that's been 12 years. But you feel like you,
I mean, I'm past it now, but at the time, even like a couple years later, it's still like, that was your dog. Your dog was,
yeah,
he was sleeping, and he was old. He didn't really do much.
yeah.
He wasn't active. He wasn't trying to bite at his stitches. He was fine. Like, it was a complete
I do
overreaction.
think it's an overreaction for sure. And then tell us about like what the experience like when your mom was diagnosed with cancer and during the time when we lived not too far from them. What was that dynamic like? What was that dynamic like
My
with your parents?
parents
Like we
are,
only lived down the street at one point in time for about a year or two.
yeah. So when we lived there, thought it'd be nice to live near my parents, like any normal
Yeah,
kid,
yeah.
see your
I'll see you
parents.
more often.
See, we only saw them on the holidays, literally Thanksgiving and Christmas. Literally, yeah, exactly. And so when mom was sick, and like I was, of course, well past college now. I don't know. Work wasn't exactly the most stable thing. I think I was working part time or something,
Yeah.
but I would come and help, and it was always like, I think any parent would like it if their kid just dropped by out of the blue.
Yeah.
You think it'd be nice if your child just was thinking about
Yeah,
you, and
because
they
a
would
lot
like
of parents don't get that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So a lot of parents don't get that. But
Yeah.
if your kid wants to just drop by out of the blue or whatever, shouldn't be a big deal. But no, with my parents, it was always at an appointment only. And I think a large part of this is mom marrying someone who's like her dad, my grandfather, who's a piece of work, is very controlling and rich with his controlling behavior. He dictated things like that. And mom was very passive. She just la di da, let it happen, didn't do crap about it.
Yeah.
And so, like, very much had a like appointment only for seeing them or for helping mom. It was difficult. It wasn't easy. And then, like, when it came closer to the end, mom was basically in a coma before she passed. And she passed, not too long after our anniversary, right?
Only a few days.
Yeah, only a few days. And Rich was like, well, you shouldn't go out and go on your anniversary or whatever. And it's
You
like,
shouldn't go anywhere. Yes,
go
you
anywhere.
shouldn't
It's
go.
like, I don't think my mom would want me to sit around and wait for her to die. That's kind of
Yeah.
morbid.
Yeah.
If that was me, I would tell my kid, go out and live life. Like,
Yeah. Because you don't know when somebody's gonna
like,
die.
you don't know.
And grief affects everyone differently. If that's something you would want it until she takes your last breath, then sure. But I know like even when my grandmother passed away, both my grandmothers when they passed away, I mean, I felt like I was forced to see my paternal grandmother after she died, and I could have done without that. And so
Yeah.
when my mom's mom passed away, I'm like my mom and brother, they wanted to go and see her like after. And I'm like, I'm okay. Like I want to be just happy with the way how I remembered her, when she was healthier and not have that be my last memory. And I just thought it was really interesting how, on one hand they're like, oh well, this needs to be like on our terms. Like you come by, you need an appointment to come and visit. And I think at one point he was even telling your mom's brother that she couldn't visit, like just being very controlling over her having visitors towards the end, but then yet has the audacity to be like, oh, well, no, you shouldn't go during your anniversary. You shouldn't leave.
Yeah. One of the few times she showed her shiny spine was put her foot down, said, no, my brother is going to come and help, and I want him here. And it's a shame she didn't do that for for her son. That would have been nice because
I think that's a lot because of her chemo made her speak up on something.
yeah, I think that's exactly it.
And I think your mom displayed very typical behavior of someone who is in not necessarily like an abusive relationship, but it's very common for women who are in a relationship with a man like that to defend them, to excuses for them. And I do remember your mom saying, like, when they kicked you out over the dogs, she insisted that it was her idea and that Rich said he didn't have anywhere to go. I don't know if I entirely believe that.
I don't believe that.
But
I don't believe that at all. I think that's all Rich is.
Right. I do remember her saying just all of a sudden, "Oh, well, I better go. Rich is gonna be home soon."
Yeah. Well, I was
I don't
like,
know, it
oh,
was really odd.
it was very odd. I was like,
Like,
oh,
"Oh, like, are you on a leash or something?" Like, I don't know, it's weird.
yeah. I was just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't really know
So,
how to respond to that.
all of these little things painted the whole picture, and I hope it does for you too, like, a lot of the puzzle pieces, like, it makes sense, like, why the way she was and the way he was, but it is really interesting because, like, there were times that he'd obviously be okay with you, but the vast majority of your relationship was very superficial
Yeah.
or him getting mad over stupid little things. And I do remember, I think this was during the time when your mom was going through her cancer stuff, or I think she was in remission at this time. Rich got offended over something I posted on Facebook. Something stupid.
It was,
You know, where they have those memes where, like, you hide certain relatives from doing your stuff because they get all offended and they come out of the woodwork. Some real stupid. I think it was about Columbus Day. I
yeah.
don't even
Now,
remember what I
it's
said.
Indigenous Person's Day or something like that.
Something like
He
that.
got super offended over it.
He got a yeah. I think I was just posted saying something like I was wondering why like this wasn't like a holiday where we could get off work or whatever, something like that. And she just flipped out. And long story short, they decided they didn't want to speak to us anymore because we were these horrible people. And I remember at the time, I actually wanted to smooth things over, like, oh, like, even though I don't feel like you did anything wrong, they just basically were like, no, have a nice life. Basically like the swan song, like, oh, have a nice life, da da da. And then I think maybe about 9 months or so, I think, go by, something like that, of mom being in remission. I think this is why why she decided that. I think she again was along with Rich every time he's offended with something. And then Rich had the audacity to tell us, "Oh, well, I'm done with you, and I've been done with both of you. Not even just me. I like, okay, just me, whatever. But it's your own stepson, like that you've known for however long, 20 years or whatever it was at this point in time. And what did we even do?" I remember it's like, God, well, what did I do to you?
Yeah, we didn't do anything, and like
Yeah, over a Facebook post.
you're like, motherfucker, you don't even like talk to me. You
Yeah,
don't.
he's never talked to me. I mean, like, yeah, I think at this point we had been married for like 5 years or something like that at this point, 4 or 5 years, and we'd been together for like six. And so, yeah, I just like punishment doesn't fit the crime. Like over a Facebook post, yeah, basically they decided they wanted to disown us over something completely stupid. And yeah, and then Rich saying, "Oh, well, I'm done with both of you." Like, okay, like you never even talked to me, or he's no, hardly even ever made any effort to talk to me. I can count on one hand. And then I think it was a few months later, I think when your mom's cancer came back, then they decided, oh, maybe you guys should come over and visit again. So it was a lot of that throughout the time that we've been together, kind of. And I think a lot of it had to do
Yeah, my stuff. I actually want to
with
just
that.
backtrack a tiny bit
Yeah.
to the family therapy I did with my
Yeah.
mom. I, I don't remember how many sessions we did, but I know we did a couple together, and it did feel like I aired out some grievances.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't happy with. I think I probably had mentioned that I wasn't happy getting kicked out over the dog. I was quite mad about that, and I felt very resentful for a long time. And then also something that rubbed me the wrong way. Now it doesn't bother me as much, but she would say like, "Oh, she felt like my buddies
Yeah.
were her other sons." It's
Yeah.
like, the hell, you only have one son. That's me.
So that's the thing. That's kind of where like the Jekyll and Hyde thing kind of comes into place, because it's like if you and her were close, and she's like by expansion that she also felt like they were close. Okay, I get it. That doesn't make any sense because like you and her didn't have a close relationship, and so that's comes across as like really weird and like
Yeah,
okay,
I don't know. It always rubbed me the wrong
right.
way. But like, she had no problem with my buddies coming over. We hang out. Like, oh yeah, I felt like they're my son, and so I was like, what the hell? I'm your son. Like, you don't even
And,
like.
and the
We don't
dogs
even.
also was
Yeah, and the dog. I mean, come on now. Like, you don't even we don't even have that
Like,
great of a
again, like,
relationship.
yeah, that's to me what I felt like was kind of the icky thing about it. Like, it's not like, oh, if you guys had a great relationship and by extension, okay, fine. But because you didn't, I just think.
Yeah, those are the only two things I can think
But
of
share a
offhand.
little bit about like what she thought her reasoning was for not being maternal towards you.
Oh, I think you had mentioned this.
Yeah.
Was her lack of oxytocin. There's some, I think it's
I think, well, you shared that with me after a counseling session.
something like that. It's been
Yeah.
so long that I
Which
don't remember, but I was
I,
like, no, I don't. I don't think that's it.
right. Yeah, yeah. And I normally don't like to like insert my opinions when I'm talking with people. I am talking with my own mom. It doesn't really make sense because oxytocin isn't just between like a parent and child. It's like it has to do with like the love hormone, like in general, which does like obviously help facilitate the bond between mother and child. But like if I mean, clearly she's, loved her animals, husband, whomever else. I just felt like that was the easy excuse to share, in my opinion, when I feel like it's a lot more complicated than
Yeah,
that.
it was.
You
Yeah,
know,
we even like really learned the real reason.
I
It
don't. I
was
don't think that's how oxytocin
yeah,
works.
no. Yeah, I was like, what? Oh, okay, but
Yeah.
it was more like childhood traumas and not dealing
Right.
with it
Yeah. I
for
mean, like, if she
years.
came out and said, "Hey, because of my childhood trauma, like, I didn't know how to be a mother," okay, I could get that. Like, I get that.
I would have been
Yeah.
more accepting of
Right.
that as,
Yeah.
a
It makes sense.
grown man and just being like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, mom, well, at least you admit now that
Right.
you're, not a good mother to me
Yeah.
when I was young.
Yeah. And it's interesting. And even like, I remember like she had like her final like birthday party that we went to. And she kind of was still kind of like loopy, but I just remember her wanting to hold my hand for some reason. And I was a little bit apprehensive. And I'm like, okay. But I mean, like, I think she identified with me in a way. And when your uncle read her eulogy about how she was glad that you were happily married and found a life partner, I think she related to me. And I think like I could kind of see that. And especially when it kind of comes to the maternal thing. And I've shared on this podcast that for most of my adult life, like I never really could relate or really ever felt maternal about like when it comes to like kids and babies and stuff like that. So I felt like she can like relate to me in some ways. And so I think that she was happy with our relationship, but Rich was not. There was one day when I used to work at Starbucks once upon a time. There was a day she came by and we were wedding prepping. And we were talking about something, and all of a sudden that she was saying how like what she wants to be called. We're married. And then she was just like, well, Rich just wants to be called Rich. And she just kind of had this very,
Exasperated with
yeah,
something.
exasperated look on her face, like, well, wish it could be different, but it is what it is. And doesn't surprise me. Rich, I mean, the way he was with you, of course, he's not going to make any effort with me. So makes sense. Yeah. I mean, he just
Yeah,
he wasn't just, it just goes way back, but I took it personally for a long time because I thought it was about me.
yeah, he was
Yeah.
not supportive of relationship
Yeah.
or us getting married, and he, as I always said, no, Rich just wants to be rich. It's like, oh, okay, and that's pretty much,
Yeah.
can sum up the whole time we're married, and it's just like, oh, apathetic attitude
Yeah.
towards our relationship or whatever. He's not.
Well, both your parents passed away before you were 30. So when your mom, between her diagnosis and her passing, I think there was like 3 years. What was that like? I mean, the last 12 years, actually, since both of your parents passed. What's it like? Like, I feel for you because it's hard for me to imagine that my parents not being around, even though, for all intents and purposes, they weren't always available to me when I was younger.
That's hard when I think about it.
Mm.
I don't really dwell on it much because it's been so long.
Yeah.
I'm glad I have you in my life.
Mm.
But so my dad's side is unlike my mom's side. My dad's side is very close. We all get along. Surprisingly, there's no family drama.
Yeah.
We all have the same views politically. That's something that would draw division. It definitely draw division. Mom's side is very, very dysfunctional. The last time we saw most of my dad's or my mom's side of the family, it was when my mom passed away. That was 12 years ago. We had seen my Uncle Pat not too long ago. I hadn't seen him in like 10 years. And I think I had messaged him not too long ago. I was like, are you and Laura still together? Oh, yeah, we're still married. We just, we moved from our place in Saratoga. That shows you how like lack of communicating with them on my mom's side. Because there are some of my cousins who I literally have not seen probably in more than 10 years.
All right. So at what point did you feel like that it clicked that you hadn't just maybe had some parts of your childhood that were tough, but that you'd really experienced trauma?
Probably now,
Yeah.
40, 41, finally just seeing a therapy just or a therapist, I guess, out of Valerie's suggestion. It helps. It really helps to talk about things from traumas. Losing a parent, especially the parent that raised you, was just really, really hard. Brain cancer. And then all of a sudden, 10 years later, finding out your other parent has brain cancer too. Like, what the heck? And then just processing not having an exactly emotionally available mother and just kind of all the, I guess, the BS that comes with that. Just because we had a very tenuous relationship. And that's part of that is her traumas that she never really addressed, or she, finally didn't start seeing therapists till like years later when, I'm a teenager and she's in her 30s.
Yeah.
And then having a parent, or step parent, I should say, who's kind of tolerated me.
Yeah.
I mean, we never really particularly got along that great. We just tolerated each other. The funny thing is, my, I guess now ex-step family always treated me like family. They were always really nice. Going to Christmas at my step grandma's, my stepdad's mom's.
I think they treated you better than he did.
Yeah, they did. They treated me better. They always treated me like family. It was nice. And I was not always as someone, as they say, that redheaded stepchild. I was treated like I was blood family. It's always nice. Can't say the same for him.
Yeah.
It was hard. I guess I just never really processed it. On one hand, you just go from two different parenting styles. Dad was kind of overprotective.
Not a stranger to two different parenting styles.
Yeah. So when I was a kid, I was in middle school. I like to read comic books. So like I would ride to the comic book store, just like ride really quick there, and then go grab a couple comics, and then ride home before dad would find out.
Didn't be like, oh, where'd those come from?
Yeah, no, because they're like, I don't know if it was from allowance or something. I don't think dad didn't pay attention to that or whatever, and he didn't know. It's just like stupid kid stuff. You want to sneak out and do stuff, and you don't want your parents to know.
Yeah.
And that's the typical thing. Mom and Rich, on the other hand, were a lot more lenient. They let me stay out later. Unfortunately, stay out till dark during summer means 4:30 in the afternoon, which is BS.
During winter, yeah.
And I was like, during winter. Mm-hmm. During winter, that was like 4:30 in the afternoon. During the summer, that meant like 9:00.
Yeah.
So that was cool. I don't know if it was my parents' idea, but one point after my freshman year, they wanted me to go to a private school for a year. So for my sophomore year, I don't know if they're still around, but it was called Sierra School. It was very small. And some of the money that dad had left me went to pay for it. It wasn't bad. It wasn't horrible. It was, it was all around. It was okay. I did make a friend there. I don't even remember his name now. It's been so long. But I think he had lived nearby because his family moved there for, I guess, his dad's work. And then they must have moved later. But I told my mom I really miss my friends and I wanted to go back to my old high school. So I went back there and that's where I graduated from. And I had a word for perfect attendance. And that that was because I took the bus and I was there half hour early every day. So I didn't get, being younger, I wasn't sick that often. So I never missed any school. So
So
that was kind of surprising.
can we pivot back just a little bit to, if you're comfortable sharing, when your aunt had conversations with your stepdad when it should have been your mom?
Oh, yeah. That was that didn't surprise me. So when dad passed away, like a good parent, when you plan for eventualities because you never know things are going to happen. You leave life insurance
Yeah.
for, your kids. For myself and my younger half brother, I've never viewed my younger brother as we're not half siblings, we're just siblings.
Mm.
Well, my aunts would say that he would try to get more money out of them to pay for things for me. But as they say, the math ain't mathing. And she said, no, that's not going to happen. I don't know. I think part of it was my parents had absolute terrible spending habits because when my stepdad had lost his job at the insurance company he worked for, my parents used his 401k to pay off 80,000 in credit card debt, which is a crap load of credit card debt. And I think part of that is just money for them to spend. And then I think my aunt realized that right away in their conversations. And the fact that she had the conversation with him and not with my aunt,
Not with your mom?
or not,
Yeah.
but with my mom. I'm sorry, I misspoke. But
Yeah.
my aunt had with him rather than my mom was, it was weird. She's it should be the biological parent, not the step parent.
Yeah, that's really strange. I don't think that's really
Yeah,
place.
and I didn't know about that until only a few years ago when we were visiting my aunt. She was talking about it, and my brother kind of joked about it because he was like, "Oh yeah, mom tried the same thing," And my aunt shut that down real quick, and he's like, "Yeah, and she didn't try it again."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I find it interesting that all these years, 12 years since your mom's passed away, I I feel like there's been people who have come forward and been like, this is how I experienced Rich. And it's been so validating to really put those pieces together and realize that it wasn't anything that we did, but it was, he had, I don't know, whatever his issue was. Or I don't know. I mean, what his past was like, I don't know. But just realizing that it was always him and not anything that we said or did.
I think we made some passive aggressive posts on Facebook, and one of his nephews like, "Oh, I know who you're talking about. Yeah, he's a dick." That's kind of funny. His own nephew is like,
his own
nephew,
relatives.
said like, "Oh yeah, my uncle's a dick."
And that says a
funny.
lot. Yeah,
it's funny because when we go back to what my uncle would say, I'd send you checks for your birthday and they never got cashed.
Oh, well, let's talk about the fact that 12 years later, your mom still doesn't have a headstone.
That pissed me off. That still pisses me off, frankly, because I was there when my stepdad was going through paying for the funeral and everything. My uncle was there and it was my stepdad and me. It cost more than our wedding. And they pay for all the expensive flowers that are probably like $1,000. And then you can pay for the police escort. That's, people pay for that. That's not cheap. I think it was probably like 1,500 or something that did not pay for a fucking headstone. And my mom still doesn't have one all these years later. So I still go there and I know where she's buried. She's buried in the same
he's
cemetery.
Remarried now. He's been remarried since I think 2017. So
it's been 5.
He's been remarried for 8 years at least.
Yeah, you're married to somebody for 20 years and you don't pay for a headstone.
Yeah, and I can understand initially I know for a period of time they were struggling financially. I understand, but it's been 12 years. There's really you can find headstones for under 1,000. We've looked into it, and your uncle I think had asked him about it too. Is she getting a headstone? And he I guess he just had a very curt reply.
I don't remember what he said, but I think he had also might have asked at the cemetery or something like that. And I think he said only legally, the spouse can pay for the headstone or some BS like that. And my aunt, she defended my stepdad over it, over not having her own sister
Yeah.
having a headstone. And my uncle Pete has stopped talking to her because of it, because she's a dick apologist, which he doesn't understand. It's like, why are you defending him over your own sister, your baby sister? Like, what the hell?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's been 12 years. There's no excuse. And again, that just says a lot about him. It's disrespectful to your late wife to not give her a headstone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really mind-boggling. But I also want to just ask, like, have you felt that these experiences, especially like earlier on, have affected our relationship at all? Mostly like your earlier trauma?
In one way, it did affect our relationship, and I think, I don't know, marriage counseling about it or something, about me telling you to deal with my family, not me dealing with my family. But I think that was not necessarily because of the traumas, but just, I don't know, I wanted to deal with it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've also had a therapist who not quite told me the opposite of that, my most recent therapist, but had said that, I mean, I think in terms of family dynamics, because my mom also lives with us and just, navigating that. And as a shared household and as, you also being the homeowner, right? And so like certain things changing the dynamics.
Yep.
But I think like earlier on, I think we kind of struggled with that, like when it came to the way your mom or
dealing with my parents.
yeah, like interacted with me and you setting that boundary, which I think is important. I think in any sort of relationship, I think that as relationships deepen and evolve and everyone's like, again, like we've all known each other for, almost 20 years now. It might be a little bit different, but I think like initially certain boundaries have to be in place. But then I think we were also so much younger then. And I actually had a therapist who told me that boundaries were non existent in my family. So we didn't really quite know how to implement those.
Yeah, I guess we're both young and it didn't dealing with, well, at least for me, for a step parent who's just an ass, and then having a mom who's not emotionally stable, and it just a very tenuous relationship with her. It's very up and down all the time.
So, kind of as we close out, is there anything that's changed now that you can see the trauma in your younger childhood years?
I would say just like, therapy helps. I guess just for anybody, and just to, it really helps to talk about these things. I think my therapist's great. He's he's very helpful, and it helps me get it out.
Yeah, and I think you find that I think everyone finds that like there's things that are unconscious that we may not realize are kind of feeding into our conscious lives and actions.
Yeah, it's nice to talk to someone and be able to vent about things that maybe, I don't know, I guess been bottled up for a long time. And just like, these things bug me. And then you like, not getting therapy when a parent passes away, and then all of a sudden you're thrust in with your other parent who you only saw like sparingly, basically, and then someone who didn't want to be a step parent, which I don't understand, because if you marry someone with kids and you're not prepared to be a full-time parent because something could happen to the other parent, and now all of a sudden you are the full-time parent, you need to think about that, because if you don't want to be a full-time parent, then you shouldn't be a step parent.
I think he must have just maybe not wanted kids. I don't know. I mean, it sounds like your parents never really talked. You never really knew if they wanted to have more kids or not, but it sounds like maybe he just didn't want kids.
I think so. I think I found at some point some book with baby names, and I asked my mom, like, what was this?
Yeah.
Like, did you actually plan on having kids?
Yeah.
And I think she probably had mentioned it or something, but it was so long ago. I honestly don't even remember. They just decided against it. That's fine. That's probably all for the better because if they did have a kid, the other kid would have been treated much, much better.
Yeah, and that's really unfortunate. I think a lot of times, if a step parent's good, you'll treat everyone on the same. But unfortunately, I can see that there are step parents that were like blended kids from, you know, like the other parents will be together, and then the step parents will treat their own biological kids better, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. And I've been treating everybody.
Yeah, I just want to say that, you'll find in therapy because I remember before you started going to therapy, you weren't entirely sure to talk about, but I think it's good because you'll find that things will come up because, if trauma is not resolved, it'll affect you unconsciously. It'll show up as depression, irritation, irritability, which affected me for a long time when I was younger. I feel like I was misdiagnosed, but that's another conversation. And it'll just manifest in different ways if it's never resolved and eventually does come back. So I think it's
Definitely.
a good thing. But I just want to say to our audience that, whether your trauma is loud, quiet, obvious, maybe even hidden, it really does still matter whether, it's something small that happened to you or large. It really does deserve acknowledgement. Your feelings, experiences are still valid. I know, we get caught up in, oh, well, my trauma wasn't as bad because this person got raped or something like that, right? As mild as it may seem, if it bothered you, it's, still something that matters. And so if this episode has resonated with you, I'd love for you to share a story with us. Again, if you'd like to come on and speak with me and share your story, I would be all about it. Let me know. But you're not alone. And I'm so glad you came on to share your story with us. In our next episode, you can interview me. How would you feel about that?
I don't even know how to interview people.
Well, yeah, it takes a little preparation, but it's not hard. But I think I want to continue this kind of marriage podcast mini series, and I'm glad that you're open to it
Yeah.
because I think you had a story to tell that I feel is so unusual, especially with both your parents passing from brain cancer, which is not common
No.
in comparison to skin cancer, breast cancer, way more common. So it's been fun to have you on here. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I had fun. We are we're currently truck camping right now, so we're recording this while we're camping in Yosemite, and I thought it'll be a little fun thing to do while we're
Yeah.
getting
It's
away
perfect
from
timing.
perfect time away from home. It's not too hot. It's pretty cool out. And it's sprinkled a tiny bit.
Yeah,
So,
we don't
but
have the ideal setup at home, but I have a few episodes in mind. So I hope you guys are up for this. But I wanted to try something a little bit different, and I am really enjoying it because we do create videos together for our truck camping channel, which I can leave a link in the description box if you guys are interested. But I wanted to kind of try creating something else together, and I feel like this is it. This is my other passion. So
yes.
Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.